For almost 15 years, I've been a designer who couldn't build. I could design an app, I could prototype it, and I could pretty much explain exactly how it should work with my eyes closed. But then I'd have to hand my work off to someone else to make it real. Over the years, I've tried learning how to code more times than I can remember, but it just never stuck. And my work would end on the canvas. But over the last year, that line has completely disappeared. I've built apps, I've automated parts of my work, and I've shipped systems that allow people to create things that would usually come to me as design requests. Ideas that would have normally died inside of a Figma file are now living things that people can actually use. And that's not because I became this S-tier developer, but because I realized that I think designers are the best prepared for what's to come next. We already know how to take a boring idea and turn it into something exciting. We understand people, intention, constraints, and systems. But the thing that we were always missing was the ability to execute beyond the canvas. And now AI gives us that ability. But that raises a much bigger question. If AI can produce the asset, then what happens to the designer? I think the answer will determine the designers that grow into the next generation of creative careers and which ones end up in this loop of creating variations of the same work. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use the skills that you already have, your taste, your judgment, your ability to take an idea and turn it into something, to direct AI, create systems, and ship things that probably would have required an engineering team. And by the end, you'll understand how to take an idea from its first sketch to something real without teaching yourself how to code. And the first step is going to feel completely backwards, but close Figma. Not forever, just hear me out. I'm still a designer and I use Figma, Framer, Photoshop pretty much every day. But for one weekend, just put those away and only work from a terminal. All of these tools that you've probably used over the years quietly teach us to think within their boundaries. You open up Photoshop and you think of an image. You open up Figma and you think of what can happen inside of a frame. You open up Framer and you think about what a website can do. You begin with what the software allows you to do, and then you kind of shove your idea into that. And a terminal does the opposite. At first, it gives you almost nothing. It's this blank box with a blinking cursor, and it feels like you've traveled back 20, 30 years and now you're this hacker. But that blank box can connect to your files, your images, your design systems, your code base, your third-party apps. And instead of working just inside of one tool, inside of one canvas, you can start to ask all of that context to start working together. And this is why I recommend starting here. Not because every designer should be this terminal or command line enthusiast, but a terminal breaks that limiting mindset that these tools have subconsciously trained into us over the years. You can use the terminal that's already on your computer, whether that's Mac or Windows, and then once you're more comfortable, I recommend moving over to something like Claude Code or Codex. The wrapper matters less here than learning to think beyond the interface. But once the software stops defining what is possible, it's your own judgment that starts to become the limitation. So you have to know what looks good and why. Let's be real, you can't describe good work if your vocabulary is make it bigger, make it cleaner, make it feel more premium. We've all had these clients and we know exactly how frustrating this feedback can be because it usually leads to nothing. There's no intention behind it. And so when we open up an AI tool and do the exact same thing, it's gonna be frustrating. Getting good at AI means getting good at articulating your ideas. You know, why does this typeface feel right? Why does this image crop create tension? Why does this interface feel quiet and minimal without feeling empty? Taste is not simply just liking good things. Part of taste is being able to explain why things work and why those decisions were made. So if you don't know where to start by copying people. Seriously. You want to find artists, designers, and creative teams that you admire and recreate their work. Not to publish it or pretend that it's yours, but this is your practice. You want to take things apart, copy their decisions, and understand what made it work in the first place. And if that feels like too much to bite off at once, then you can do this instead. As you're scrolling social media or the web, you can save 10 things. And for each of those things, you write one sentence about each. Not, I like this because it's cool, but you want to pinpoint things like the grid that they're using, or the typeface, or the color palette, or the negative space that they're using. I recently became obsessed with this after constantly losing good references to X-bookmarks and desktop screenshots and forgotten Apple Notes. And eventually I just built something to fix it, but we'll come back to that in a little bit. For now, the point is that when I sit down to work with AI, I have my references, I have my language, and I have my point of view. And once you understand how to better explain your ideas, you stop asking AI to guess your tastes, and you start actually directing AI to do the work. Now, when it comes to design, these AI models are by no means perfect, and I approach it like I'm working with a junior creative. I know that sounds crazy, and AI is definitely smarter than me, but just bear with me for a second. They're capable, they're fast, but they weren't in the meeting or they didn't see the 10 rounds of failed iterations before, and they definitely can't see that idea that's in your head. When you work with AI, you have to set the foundation to set them up to succeed. Something that we're all familiar with as designers. So what is the objective? What does success look like? Who's this for? What should someone feel when they look at this? And what are the things that they should and shouldn't do? Sometimes that might mean putting together an entire plan before I start building, and other times that might just mean providing screenshots, meeting transcripts, brand guidelines, or examples of what I don't want to happen. Now, there's still this back and forth process that happens, but that's not AI failing. That's kind of this new creative process. You're no longer pushing every pixel. You're directing the work, reviewing the results, and then deciding what happens next. In my opinion, this is where most people go wrong. They look for this end-all be-all prompt that is going to get the finished result in one shot, and that's not the skill. The skill is now management. It's knowing what must exist before the work begins and breaking the idea into stages. You could be 6 months out of university or 10 years into the design industry like me, but it forces you to think like a director. Define the problem, assemble the context, communicate the intention, and judge what comes back. Working with AI quietly levels you up, and you don't learn this overnight by installing the perfect app or 50 skills. You learn it by handing AI one piece of real work that you already understand. Start with one task that you do all the time that you would never want to manually do again. Maybe that's resizing images, reformatting copy, or even cleaning up video edits. The task matters less than the conditions. It should be real, it should be repetitive, and it should be clear enough to understand what a good result looks like. What you're gonna do is take one workflow, show AI the inputs, the decisions, the finished examples, and the mistakes that you normally correct, and then automate one part of that process. Use it on real work, and then add the next part. Every correction is knowledge that you no longer need to keep inside your head. Eventually, the task stops being something that you execute and a process that you start to supervise. And once it works, you don't have to explain it again next week. This is when a workflow becomes a skill. And a skill packages what AI needs to repeat the work. Instructions, examples, templates, assets. You also don't need to start from zero to start using skills within your workflow. You can actually use what other builders have already made, understand it, and adapt it to your own process. This is exactly what I did for Zara Zhang's front-end slide skill. Part of one of my contracts involved creating presentations for teams across an organization. New copy, new layouts, new assets, slight tweaks here and there. And a deck could take anywhere from hours to days. But the larger problem was the queue. Small variations would keep arriving, putting bigger projects on hold. Now, the teams weren't afraid to edit a deck. They were scared to design, and they were afraid of creating something that didn't feel on brand with the company. Now, the team can take a transcript, meeting notes, or data from our actual CRM and use it to build an entire presentation using the same visual system that I would have applied myself. The important part is not that AI can now make a deck. It's that years of design and brand experience is now a system that other people can actually use. The AI and the skill didn't take design out of the process, it made that design knowledge portable. But this system still began with work that someone assigned me. And the bigger shift happened when I realized that I could just build things that nobody asked for. Designers have always grown through self-initiated projects. The poster that nobody commissioned, the weird experiment that you want to make just to understand something. And AI doesn't change anything about this instinct. If anything, it actually just removes the distance between the idea and the thing itself. So build that Mac app, build that iOS app, or that plugin, or that weird tool that only makes sense to you. But don't stop at the one-shot website prompt that everyone makes for social media cloud. That really doesn't demonstrate anything. If anything, it just demonstrates that the AI models can produce a website and knows how to code, and that's pretty easy. Remember I mentioned that references problem I had earlier in the video? I wanted something more than just a folder on my desktop for screenshots. I wanted something closer to like an art director that would live inside of my design process. Something that would help me organize what I saw and then actually put those references to work when I was ready to start designing. And so I built what I call Hipppo. Now, Hipppo solves a very personal problem, and once I began building it, the questions started to change. It was no longer, how do I keep my references organized? But instead I started to ask, how do I share these references with AI? How does AI start to understand my personal taste? And how can I use these references to work with AI to create something new? Now, this is where you start to go from designer to builder, but it's also where a lot of AI projects start to fall apart. Getting something to work locally on your computer is easy now, but getting things to actually work in the hands of other people requires a baseline of how software and these apps are actually shipped. Now, you don't need to become a traditional developer before you can make something real, but you do need a baseline. So understanding how project files are related, things like GitHub, how to connect to your third-party services, what testing looks like, and what must happen before real people can actually use the thing. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. You can't learn everything while also doing your actual job. And if I'm being honest, neither can I. But you can use existing resources and even skills for planning, reviewing, testing, and shipping until you develop that knowledge yourself. Now, you don't need every plugin or framework that currently exists under the sun. You want to use the parts that protect you from the mistakes that you'll actually make. Now, I'll go ahead and put some skills on the screen of some of the ones that I really enjoy using that have helped me as a designer. And by no means have these turned me into an experienced engineer, but they helped me to be a whole lot less reckless. Being a builder today is not about personally writing every line of code. It's carrying the idea beyond the mock-up, beyond the prototype, and beyond the version that only works when you're standing right in front of it. It means taking responsibility for the outcome, and that responsibility, I think, is where the real shift is happening in our role. When I started working this way, I expected AI to make me a lot faster, but I didn't necessarily expect it to make me more creative. All of the small tasks that are buried inside of a designer's day can just quietly drain the energy out of the work. Things like resizing, reformatting, updating copy, searching, exporting, versioning. Individually, none of this is catastrophic, but altogether usually fills in the gaps of where your better ideas are hiding. And if I'm being honest, AI has let me return to the parts of design that I genuinely love. Things like higher level thinking, exploration, problem solving. I can actually have time to sketch designs now, and then I actually hand them to AI. Now, this new tech hasn't removed me from the creative process, and if anything, it's given me more room to move inside of it. But this requires accepting that our role is changing. And whether you're 6 months out of university or 15 years into your career, AI subconsciously forces you into management. Not like traditional corporate management, but management of context, of intention, and of quality. Your job is no longer to make every asset. Your job is to create the conditions where good work can actually happen. Now, people always hire designers for their craft, their reputation, and their relationships, but if the only value offer is individual assets, then I think you're gonna have limited opportunities for growth. You can keep finding more customers and you can keep trying to produce faster, or you can become the person that turns creative judgment into leverage. So, if AI can produce the asset, then what happens to the designer? The next horizon that I see is the AI design engineer, the creative technologist, the designer who can actually build. And this is what I mean by becoming the most AI-pilled designer of your friends and your team. It's not about knowing every model or installing every plugin or generating more images than everyone else. It's becoming the person that can move from intention to reality. You don't have to try and change your entire career over the weekend. You can just start by taking one piece of real work and handing it to AI with the intention, the references, and the constraints. Review what comes back and then make that part of a system. And then keep going until the idea leaves the canvas and turns into something actually real. The first attempt most likely is going to be useless, and that's okay, don't give up. You're just looking for that moment when something that would have ended inside your head or a Figma file works in the hands of another person, because I think being just a designer might not be cool anymore. But designers were always builders, and now the tools have finally caught up. Listen, if you like this video, if you like this type of content, do me a favor, please leave a like, leave a comment, and subscribe to this channel. And with that, I will see you in the next video.